Well, happy Friday to you. It is day 50 of lockdown, and I'm struggling to. I see the problem. Okay. After 50 days of this, we're kind of so used to it being there that we don't know what it's like without it anymore. Day 50 of lockdown. Can you believe we almost need a Jubilee day, don't we, to kind of set us free from the restrictions that we're facing? Let's apply some Old Testament principles badly to this stage that we're in. Folk, on this Friday morning, just want to change track a little bit and encourage you. I think hopefully everything's been encouraging thus far, but as we move into the weekend, just with just an uplifting view of the nature and the character of our God, and it is to see Him and behold Him on His throne and to adore Him in very, very real ways. COVID-19 has certainly sparked much social aid and relief aid effort. We've seen the government and NGOs and agencies and churches all seen the need around us in our own country and further afield and responding to the need with food and assistance for those who have lost their jobs and lost their incomes and lost the means to support themselves and to buy and support food, support themselves and their families at this time. Even so encouragingly, in the early part of this week, I think it was even last weekend, the farmers in the Western Cape had heard of the need in certain poor suburbs of Cape Town, and they rallied and actually dropped off significant amounts of fresh produce. It's like we don't even want the government to be involved, we can do it ourselves. And just took stuff even from the agricultural community and reached into the lives of people that were in desperate need of aid in that way. And folk, that's what fuels agencies, that helping of people, because people feel compassion. They're driven to reach out and help in a particular way. And both Christian and non-Christian groups do that. Why? Just think about it. I mean, we're not naturally wired in our sinfulness to think of anything beyond ourselves. I mean, we're filled with sinful pride. Why would we even think of others? And I would venture to say that it's because of something of the image of God within us, that in God's common grace, in the very nature of people, there's a flicker of care for others, a flicker of care for humanity. It certainly is not perfect, it's certainly not in any way close to the perfections of God, but people are wired to, even in their sinfulness, to reach out to others. Why? Well, if we're made in His image in that way and share just some of the personal characteristics of God, albeit in a sin-affected way, we need to see that our God is a compassionate God. An aspect of God's essential nature is this, that He feels sympathy, that He has a sympathetic understanding of human weakness. God looks at those in trouble, He looks at those in need, and He desires to lift them up and to restore them and to bring help in a very real sense to those who are in distress. Even though all creation is under the judgment of God, the wrath of God is abiding on everyone, God still has the sense of compassion for people. And folk, we need to see that and just realize that and be affirmed by that this morning. That's always been the case. That's essentially who God is. He is unchanging. We don't and dare not fall into this error that God somehow metamorphosizes between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That somehow in those 400 silent years between Matthew and Malachi, this harsh, remote, angry God of the Old Testament kind of changes and we see the compassion of God in Jesus for the first time. That's not true. I mean, remember Moses on Mount Sinai? Moses going up there and hiding himself in the cleft of the rock, and God speaking to him there in Exodus 33 and saying, I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord, Yahweh. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And in the very next chapter we read, and the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. If we carry on reading Psalm 103 verse 13, as a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to all those who fear him. There it's couched in a covenant relationship. It's not just everyone, but it's those that have a relationship with a God-fearing relationship with him. Or consider Psalm 145 verses 8 and 9. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. Folk, we need to see that the Lord is compassionate to those who are in deep trouble. When God sees human distress, he is moved in his essential nature to reach out in that way. Don't we see that in James chapter 5 and verse 11, as James writes, referring us back to the story of Job, "Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." God looks at Job in all of his brokenness and his pain, and there is compassion that is brought to bear in the midst of that man's distress. God has a particular sense of compassion to those who are sinners, even as he reaches out to them in forgiving ways. Do you remember what we saw just probably about 2 weeks ago from the book of Micah? Micah chapter 7 verse 19. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. God will again have compassion on us. Fallen, broken sinners who have transgressed his law and committed great evil against him. God has compassion on them to reach down into their mess and to touch them and to redeem them. And so, folks, we need to see in the midst of this corona outbreak season, God is still an unchanging God. He is still compassionate. God is aware of what is happening, and God will act in compassionate ways as his plans and his purposes unfold. And so, folks, I think that leaves us with a twofold challenge for this morning. A twofold challenge for this morning. Are we compassionate like him? Are we showing compassion like him? I think that is bearing in terms of our own lives, our own homes, our own marriages, our own interactions with people, even our interactions with people within our local church. The Apostle Paul says in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience." There is a need for us to respond in compassionate ways to those around us. But if I can suggest to you on this Friday morning that goes beyond that as well, that as we hear of need, as we interact with people who are in need, those that are hurting, those that are lonely, the financially compromised, the anxious, the distressed, the wavering, and the bereaved, that we hear the words of God given to us through the pen of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, reading from verses 3 and 4, where we read, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction." Why? So that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Folks, you see that this morning? We receive comfort from God in our affliction as his compassion reaches into our mess, and therefore we call to minister that out horizontally to other people as well. And so, folk, on day 50 of lockdown, question for you: how can we be a conduit of the compassion and the comfort of God to others? What can be done in real practical ways today or this weekend or even on Sunday, when typically we would gather together for worship as a congregation of God's people? How can you show compassion and a comfort to somebody else? How can you and I reflect the comfort of our compassionate God at this time, at this particular point in history? I leave that with you on day 50 of lockdown.